back again. Another new video here. So in the last one you've seen we got the drivetrain into the Jeep, and now we're moving to the part that I'm most afraid of, and that is doing the bodywork. So I have pieces of the Jeep strewn all about the garage and about the yard. There's at least 12 major what I call body pieces, fenders, and obviously the tub, the roof, the hood, and so on. And then there's also all the additional things like the fenders and the side steps and so on. So there's a lot of little pieces. All of them got to get prepped and get ready for paint. So basically, gonna be a whole lot of preparatory work here. We'll just check in with Jurassic Jack and see if he has any comments. Right. Okay. Are you excited about how your Jeep's coming along?
Sure.
Sure? Yeah, you're gonna do some work? You're gonna get doing some sanding in this video, maybe? Maybe? Anything? You gonna contribute in some way?
I will shove this headphones down my throat.
All right. Okay, so we're making progress. And stick with us. All right, so starting with the tub, going to pull off the rear tailgate first. Really, this thing's just a mess because I've been leaving it sit here for, well, about a year now. Jack's starting to help me in his pajamas, it looks like. So it's still nice out at this point. Now here, this is an interesting kind of sidebar. I've decided to install a subwoofer into this back little corner. It's kind of useless space in the Jeep. And being that I used to be a stereo installer, I'm like, you know what, I think I could do something clever here. And so I'm actually just building up the box first. This is just standard 3/4 inch plywood. And it's going to be 4 sides, all equal sides. So I'm just cutting the 4 sides here equal. I ended up going with a kicker sub. It's very small cubic foot requirements. I think it was around 0.4 cubic feet. And so I picked it specifically because I felt it would fit in that amount of space. And here, just cutting the, I guess you'd call it the front and back of the box. And now I have all of the 6 sides. Now here I'm just finding the middle of it, making sure the sub's going to fit, and then drawing a rough circle from where it's going to be. And I'm happy with that. So now I actually have to cut the hole, and I used to do these with jigsaws, but then I discovered if you use just the routing table and just have a base board where I put a nail through and then spin it like this, you can get a perfect circle every time. It's a little bit extra setup work, but it works out way better in the end. Now gluing the box together. I always use wood glue when I'm building a subwoofer box. It's what holds it together. The screws are there just till the glue sets, and it'll make this thing extremely airtight. The plywood is a little bit more porous, mostly because it has bits and holes and where the knots were in the different layers of the plies. Now here I'm actually just making sure it's all flat, just buzzing off, you know, a bit of a saw width on each one to make it perfectly flat and make the tops and bottom seal, which of course now are installed. Now at this point there's actually a bit of a groove I need to put in the bottom of the box. So I'm just doing a couple passes on the saw to create this groove. And you can kind of see on the bottom there's a flange where the roll bar connects, and I need that flange to fit inside the box. And jumping right on, now I'm at Consolidated Compressor here in Calgary. So they rent out these sandblast facilities. So they give you the hood and the little cute pinny and then the fire hose and a spot to work. And it's kind of like going to the beach. You can see the sands everywhere. And I've never done this before, but it's about $150 an hour, and it makes quick work of all that undercoating on the Jeep. And so this was kind of an adventure. So you can see it's really cleaning it up compared to what it used to look like. And it's not something you want to do at home, obviously, because this just makes a mess. And so they have about 8 stations. You can just kind of roll in, and they set you up, and it really looks good. And so I'm doing a little bit on the inside here too, mostly just areas where there's a little bit of rust or anywhere where I have to do some repairs. I'm just kind of buzzing it a little bit. So not everywhere, because I am going to be painting this, and the sandblasted surface isn't going to look as good with paint as the non-sandblasted surface, and I'll show you in a minute here. And you can see some of the damage now that's starting to get exposed. But yeah, so the finish is beautiful. Like, it looks really nice. At this point, I was feeling that I could paint the bottom and make it look nice with like a high build primer. That opinion will change in a little bit here. And so this is some of the damage that I'm talking about. You can see where the previous owner did some work there to repatch some of this, but there's just a lot of holes you can't deal with. And here it's a close-up. It gets you an appreciation of what it looks like. It is a textured finish when you're done. It's a nice finish, but it is textured. And here's an example of what the subwoofer box looks like once it's installed and in place. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. I finished it with sort of a truck bed liner just to make it waterproof. Now, unfortunately, to cut the 10-inch hole in here, I actually have to get to the inside of the box because I actually don't know exactly where the 10-inch hole exists from the inside. So I felt if I could get in here, and at first I tried a hole saw, that just didn't work because my hole saw was dull. So I just started cutting a hole here with the grinder. And once I get the hole established, I can put my hand in, get a small drill in there, and I can put holes around at the cardinal points of the circle. So basically north, east, south, and west. And then I can put the template on top and then draw the circle, which is what you're going to see here in a minute. And there I am drawing the template. You can kind of see the one little light hole at the top there. So those cardinal points allow me to get the circle in exactly the right spot, and then I can remove the box and properly cut the circle. So for the cutting here, I just used my normal jigsaw, and I sort of regret that now. Later on in the project, I found an air-powered pneumatic jigsaw that would have been way better for this. But I ended up doing it this way anyway. I kind of had to cut a little bit from the inside, a little bit from the outside. I had to work it down kind of piecemeal. But in the end, I was able to cut the entire circle out and get to the point where the subwoofer would fit in. So there's the sub. It's a Kicker RT10 for those who are looking. And I verified that it fits. So now I'm just going to clean up the edge here with some flap sandpaper just to kind of take the burrs out and make it a little happier. Another test fit. So that worked out pretty good. So there you can see that flange on the bottom. Kind of got to get it positioned just right. And it is kind of a nuisance to get it in here. You notice I've also removed the top piece that was along there. And you'll see later that I end up cutting more out to make it fit. But there it is. Kicker RT10, 10-inch sub. Completely stealth install and doesn't sort of violate the integrity of the Jurassic interior, if you will, which was a goal of mine. So Bernie's back. And we're going to start tackling some of the fixes to the tub. I've never done sheet metal restoration work before, so Bernie stopped by to help. He brought this cool little tool, which is kind of like an air nibbler or something. I'm not exactly sure what the name is, but you got to have one. They're under $100. And so now we're installing the first panel here. So basically get it close and make minor little cuts and bends to get it into place. And once you have those done, you just work on it with a hammer, kind of push it into the corners, get it flat. Get it where it needs to be. This doesn't need to be perfect. It's the floorboard. So really just kind of close counts. Now this is one of the most damaged areas. This was beneath the roll bar on the driver's side. And for some reason the driver's side is way worse on this vehicle. Not exactly sure. Maybe it's because it's on the center of the road all the time. But we're cutting that out, and that's with that with the angle grinder as well as with that reciprocating pneumatic saw that Bernie brought along. And so kind of getting that worked away and opened up. And you can see that the sort of what I call the frame of the body there is still intact. I know a lot of guys got to replace those entirely, and I got lucky that I didn't have to. And so now we're just tack welding on a piece of sheet metal on the bottom. We're going to have to go over both sides of this here to get this all sealed up. But it is starting to come together. And you get an appreciation for what we're doing here. So again, rigidity is the name of the game here. And here we are on the bottom doing the same thing, putting in another steel support. All right, and some real-time video for you here. So, you know, those welds aren't great, but they're going to do the job. To be honest, I've never done sheet welding before, so it's a challenge. Now on the inside, of course, getting the base put in place, pounding it down. So this is actually a fairly contoured section of the Jeep, and in order for the roll bar to even fit, it's got to be done right. And so there you go. Everything's fixed up. You notice we put a little bit of steel over the top of that sort of frame rail as well, just to strengthen it up. There's another little spot we had to clean up where there were some holes. I'm not going to fill in all the holes with steel. Later I'm going to do that with some fiberglass resin, which you'll see. Then this was on the other side. Again, a lot better when you get over to the passenger side. And that was that little saw that I was mentioning, doing a cardboard template for the steel here. And then we're going to cut the steel out with the little nibbler again. and putting it into place. And I found that when I was welding things in, the best way was to put these holes in it and just spot weld through the holes. It's almost how they do it from the factory. I mean, they spot weld these things together. But for me to do it with the MIG, I got to just drill a hole first, and then I weld right through the middle of the hole. And I found that that was a lot more effective than trying to do the edge welding all the time. And it would give you a base to stick with. And now grinding it up, how to make a good weld grate. And there it is. So it's all sealed up. It's pretty strong. It's not beautiful. Won't win any awards, but it'll do the job. And then again on the other side, did some cleanup and then tacking this new piece in. Again, we just need it to be waterproof. We need it to be strong. And then we're going to put some new nuts on the back to actually attach the roll bar to. So this is a fun little diversion. I bought a little sandblaster from Princess Auto, and I thought, well, I've got a sandbox full of sand. Let's see how that works. So I filtered the sand with a sieve from the kitchen, and there you go. Put some sand in there, and Jack helped me do a little bit of sandblasting on just some small pieces here. This was actually just a seat belt bolt. So this is where it actually attaches right here. And then we're just going to spot weld that into place as well. And there you go. You have the seatbelt base installed and nice and strong, probably even stronger than it was when it came out of the factory. And I always like to give these things a little tap. So I did that with all the bolts on the bottom here. I just showed some of them, but anywhere where I added steel, I re-tapped just to clean them up. Now on the back, these are where the body bolts go, and so in both cases, these broke off, and so there's actually a, I guess you'd call it a big nut on the inside. It's really just a 1/4-inch chunk of steel with a hole threaded through it. But they broke off in there, and they're kind of rattling around in there, and so I got to get them out. So first I removed the top plate, and now I'm drilling a hole into the side so I can get access. Now the hole ended up being a bit bigger, so I had to kind of open it up a bit, and then you'll see I pull this plate out. And so I did that on both sides, and I'm going to replace them, and rather than using the old plates, I'm just going to make new ones out of some C-channel steel and welding a nut onto those. So again, not a great weld, but you just got to make it strong, really fill it in there. And as before, I'm going to tap this out, so I'll drill the hole and then bring in the tap. And so now this makes a nice, strong, and thick base. And so now I've stuck it in there and shoving a bolt through from the top and tightening it down so it'll suck what I'm calling that plate or that nut up against the surface, and then spot welding it through again just to secure it. Again, it doesn't need to be that strong. It just needs to stay there until you get the body bolts in. And now I'm putting a reinforcing plate over the top, just like the one that I removed before. And again, spot welding that through. So at this point, my welding is getting better. I'm starting to learn a little bit about the spot welding and the techniques and the settings that I need to use for this. And it looks a lot better. And then again, I'm doing it on the front side, so those holes that I drilled, I have to cover those up. And so same technique, cut a plate, spot weld it into place, and then grind it to make it look decent. Coming together, hey? All right, so now I'm thinking, just what I've done with this subwoofer, it ain't working. I'm just going to remove this chunk of crappy steel and replace it with a new one. It means I'm going to have to do some more Autobody work down there, but it also means that this is going to be much stronger than what it was with that flimsy stamped steel. And it'll still fit with my sub box. And across the top, I'll just put a new cross member that I'll paint, and it'll be happy. So it all fits up nice. But now I actually have to put the tailgate bracket. So it's in the foreground there. You can kind of see it. And now that bracket doesn't fit properly anymore with the sub box. So I have to kind of re-engineer a new one and reinforce it and weld it. So that's what I'm doing here, is just building a new bracket for it and welding it into place. So I think this will work. In the end, the other bracket takes most of the strain because it's on the top. And so this one is not as significant. It still is significant for all the times you leave your tailgate hanging open. And so that's me cutting the old bracket and again drilling some of my spot weld holes here so I can weld it into place. And some of the bigger holes, which is where the tailgate bolts will go through. And welding the two back together again. So, been a lot of welding so far in this. A lot more than I ever anticipated when I started this project. And now welding the bracket into place on the vehicle. Again, this is going to do a lot of distorting of the exterior, but I've kind of accepted I'm going to need to do Autobody work anyway. Confirming the sub box still fits, and it does. This makes me happy. Great stuff. So now I'm going on to reinforcing the bottoms. Remember where all those places where there were holes and there were gaps and the previous owner had done some work? I'm starting to fill those in, and this is just a long strand Bondo putty. So it's a fiberglass with the built-in strand and as well as the resin. And as you can see, it's kind of peanut buttery. It dries like a rock. So this stuff is really hard, and it really just strengthens those areas that have been extra thin. So you can't reconstitute a body this way, but you can just make it denser, thicker, a little bit stronger. And now I'm sanding it down with an aggressive 80 grit. It doesn't last long. This stuff just chews through sandpaper because it's basically bits of glass in hardened resin. And so it's pretty tough. Getting all that cleaned up, and I'm kind of pretty much applying it, almost like peanut butter at this point. Just get it on there wherever I see that there's some holes. I want to fill in the holes. I want to strengthen. It's about this time I realized that I wasn't going to be able to paint the bottom of the Jeep, and I was going to have to do a bed liner finish. And so I kind of just abandoned all hope of making it look good at this point and just started getting the goop on there. So that's all working out pretty good and strengthening it up. All right, so remember where I talked about where I was welding? So this is where that subwoofer support got welded, and it created some pretty ugly looking divots. The paint all bubbled, and I had to really get in there and clean it up with some aggressive grit sandpaper. And so that's what I'm doing here. And this was one of the more challenging Autobody fixes. I mean, the Jeep in general is very flat, which helps, but I've never done Autobody before, so I'm learning as I go as you watch this. And even as I watch it now, I look back and go, wow, I really didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. And so here is the Bondo. You mix it up, give it a good stir. At this point, I'm still mixing it on that nice, pretty white piece of plastic. Eventually, I switch over to a marble tile, or you can get like a glass tabletop type thing, something that you can reuse and clean up easily. So you can even see, like, there's just the divots in there are still quite apparent. It's interesting when you watch it on the video to see, it's like, wow, it looks way worse than it did to my eyes at the time. And now I'm using a dual action sander, clean it up for the first coat. Now you spray the black spray paint on here, because then when you come back and sand, you can actually see where all the low points are. And as you'll see, I have a lot of them. So I didn't even really get close. And so it's kind of, Jack and I would play a game, what's that face looking at you? But you can see there's a lot of pits there. So now I'm starting to fill them in. So I do several coats of this before I get it very good. But this was part of the learning process for me. And at this point, I've switched over to using my little quarter sheet jitterbug sander. I found that this was the best thing to use on the Jeep. Honestly, if you're trying to do a large panel, you want to do it by hand. But when you're doing something that's completely flat and just kind of taking the edge off it, I found the little jitterbug worked a pretty good solution. And here I'm hand sanding it a little bit too. So I'm doing about a 150 everywhere to get started. This Jeep was painted, and you can tell the previous owner just painted it outside or in a garage because it's got specks everywhere. And so I had to take all of those specks out. And so that's why I was starting with a 150, whereas I think often you could start a lot higher than that. This side wasn't as bad because I didn't do any welding over here. And so that helped. And, obviously my skills are getting a little bit better as I go as well. If you mix a little more of the red stuff in here, it gets to the point where it'll dry faster, but you do have to be careful with that. So notice now I'm hand sanding with a block. So the Jeep being completely flat, I just can take a piece of wood, but you can actually buy things called Durablocks, which will contour and take the shape of your panels. But for me, I found this just worked much better for making it flat, because that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to make it flat. And so again, I switched over to this side, and you can start seeing aliens' faces and things showing up in the patterns here. Jack's going to miss that guy. And doing some more little spot work here and there. So a lot of this is actually going to be hidden by the fender arches, but I've decided to do it all right anyway. Let's get it right the first time. So now it's starting to get pretty flat. So back to the bottom, again, I've abandoned any hope of painting this, so now I'm just gobbing on some seam sealer. So anywhere where I feel that there's could be some water ingress, I'm cleaning it up and filling it up. The Raptor liner will give a complete coat on this, and this is just kind of being doubly safe. And again, because I'm going with the Raptor liner, I'm no longer going to use the plastic wheel well inserts. So I've decided I'm just going to cover up this box with some steel and then Raptor line that as well. So that's what I'm doing here, is just kind of creating a couple more steel panels to protect the subwoofer box. And I think that'll look nicer in the end too. It'll be a little noisier, but I think I have some mitigating strategies for that on the inside that I can do. So there it is. It fits pretty nice, and I'm going to put a couple holes in that where I'm going to attach it down to the box, and that's what will hold it into place. And again, doing it on the front, same thing, cutting my template to fit. And there it is, and it's happy. I'll put a couple holes in that, and I'll be able to screw that down to the box as well. So now my subwoofer box will be nice and safe for the long term. Now on the other side, again, since I'm not going to go with those plastic wheel wells, I have to do the same type of thing to protect this rear cavity. And really all that happens in this rear cavity is you have the fuel filler nozzle. So you have where the hose come in and it goes up towards the filler entry. There's also some wiring that goes through this section too. So you can't just seal it off. So I'm just going to kind of leave it open a little bit here, and then I can protect that with something rubber later. But you can see it fits in there nicely, and it's going to protect that surface, which is going to get pretty banged up with rocks and things. So I wanted to reinforce that. So that's it for the tub for now. Now I'm starting to tackle some of the many other pieces that need to be done. This is obviously the roll bar, and the bottom of this thing was pretty gnarly just from all the rust that had taken over the years. Now I'm getting to the inside of the tub, cleaning it up. This is kind of just an aggressive grit. I'm going to be painting all this, so this is really just for paint adherence, get any bits and burrs and things out of the way. On the front, this part was actually pretty easy, so I'm doing a much higher grit here, and I got a larger sander to do bigger pieces at a time. My poor Volvo is getting dirty. I don't know why I buy a new car and then I sand with a bunch of red stuff, but that's what I do. So getting that all cleaned up, and now I'm wet sanding it with a 320. So I basically took every panel to a 320, every exterior surface. If you're doing a base clear, you'd have to go higher, but since I'm going single stage, that's enough. So Jurassic Jack is chipping in now at this point. We don't see him a lot in here because this was, really boring work, but I did get him helping a little bit on these door panels. He's going to tucker out fairly soon, and it'll be pretty obvious when he does. Yeah, slowly going. Slowly. I did get some of these sponges, which have sandpaper built right into them, and those are really handy for some of this work. And I'd recommend you getting a stack of those. You can wash them and reuse them, and they're really nice for doing anything that's contoured. And getting all that cleaned up. Now here, these holes, I'm just kind of grinding them out, is actually where the clip goes when you have a soft upper door on these half doors. And I'm not planning on doing that, so I'm just going to grind them down, and I'm going to fill them in with Bondo. As you can see, I'm using that marble tile now to spread and mix my Bondo. So filling in the holes, again, this is kind of the first time I did that with the Bondo, so it's a bit of a learning process. And all the other high spots and low spots that I found that I had to fix up on the doors. This door did actually have a dent that was repaired at EcoDent here in Calgary, and he did such a great job, it didn't even need to be filled with Bondo where the dent was. So unfortunately, that job cost as much as the door did, so it's not something I wanted to do a lot of. And just sanding it down again here with the jitterbug again and cleaning it up. As you can see, it's starting to take shape. And since I won't have that C-clip rail on here, I just have a nice smooth finish on the top of the door. Wet sanding again with the 320, and I just have a bottle of water that I got from the dollar store, and I just kind of shoot it on there. That's a nice way of getting the water on, and then wipe it off, put it away. So moving on to the rear tailgate. Getting the latch cover off here, I'm going to actually get that powder coated and then paint the rest of the door. But I had to kind of take a lot of pictures, keep an eye on how this whole thing goes together. They're complicated beasts, these latches, and so I had to be really careful about tracking the pieces and putting them away. Giving it a good sand again. The inside here was actually pretty gross, so I started with a more aggressive 80 grit. And, there's a lot of things that, this is a tailgate, right? Stuff bangs into it, and it sees a lot of the elements. So it was in kind of rough shape on the inside. So I cleaned that up sort of extra good. And now I'm onto the 220 with the hand paper. And using that, again, that same 220 sponge paper or soft paper on the roll bar. I'm only going to take this to a 220 because it's all covered with foam anyway. And here we are. We're just kind of charging through now. Front panels. There's panel after panel after panel. I'm going to be painting the inside again with body color or Raptor liner. I haven't decided yet. This corner needed to be pretty much reconstituted because it was banged up in a mess. So I cleaned up a bit with the metal, but mostly it's just a Bondo corner. Not great, but that's what I got. With one of the wheel arches, the previous owner, again, didn't really take his time painting these, and there got to be a bunch of runs in them. So I found it was easy to clean that up with the vibrating sander. And again, now these parts are getting a little bit easier. They're all smaller, they're lightweight, and they're plastic, and so it's just, you can really hammer these out in a hurry. And here's a running board as well. In the end, I was really thinking I could reuse some of these original red pieces, but there haven't been many that I've been able to reuse. And as a result, I probably didn't need to keep the original red color that I did end up procuring anyway. So let's hope it matches up right. But yeah, cleaning all those up and washing them down and cleaning out the inside, which is really kind of gross. And again, on the other one here. And moving on to the hood. So the inside of the hood has definitely never been painted. So this was original paint. And you can kind of tell because as I keep sanding it, it's got a darker substrate than a lot of the other panels that I've been painting. So I don't know if it was just a primer or whatever. It's almost more of like a black. It's really dark. But I think this hood will look really nice with the inside of the hood being painted the same sand beige. And washing it up, you can really get an appreciation for how dark it is under there. But I don't need to do any Autobody work in here. It's all decent on the inside. On the outside, not the same story. There's a number of dents that I was able to find. You know, a really good Autobody guy would probably, try and bang these out and flatten them. I'm not that guy, so I'm going to do it with Bondo because goop is a lot easier to work with than metalworking tools. And now I'm just down to a 150 just to sand the whole thing. And again, if you're doing big panels like this that are already contoured properly, you can use the jitterbug sander. If not, you're going to want to do a hand sand. And again, applying all the Bondo at all the spots that seem to be having problems. The more I look, the more I find. And then sanding them down until they get flat. So this is still at about a 150. A lot of dust. And washing it up and hitting it with the wet sand. So there's a few other spots that I've identified that are trouble. So here's the wet sand. And I'm going to end up filling those in. I'm not sure we get it on the video here, but now this is, again, a nice 320 finish. Really nice and smooth at this point. I'm very happy with kind of how this has turned out at this point. The wet sanding is the ticket. It's the best way to finish. And now just doing another wipe down. So I know later on I did go back and spot fill a few other holes, but I didn't get that on the video. This video was over 5 hours of content when I first started editing it, and I got it down to about 40. And so consider that I'm running it at 15 times, so that was more like 75 hours of work. So you get an appreciation for how much effort went into this Autobody work just from the amount of GoPro footage that I had. So here again, we're doing the door. I removed the mirrors. I've decided I'm going to actually go with the big mirrors, the same mirrors that go on the half doors, because I have 2 sets of them. I ordered one by accident, and then the doors that I bought already came with them. So I had 2 sets, and the little mirrors just suck. So I was filling in some of those holes there is what I was doing on that door. And now sanding the inside, you don't see much of this, but I'm going to treat the whole door the same. And I did notice there was a broken weld here, so I'm going to have to tack weld this back in. So this is right beneath where the little triangle window base goes. So just cleaning this up. And again, once it's welded, how do you make a good weld grate? Well, you get the grinder out and it actually turned out pretty well, and it seems to be strong again. There's not a lot of steel in there, but I managed to get it at least to stay together for now. Now, moving on to the windshield, I had thought I could get the glass out on this thing, but I was unable to, and I had to take it to a shop to get them to do that. So really at this point, I was just removing the VIN plate, and then I left it for now, and I moved on to the front grille. So here I'm removing the headlight surrounds, for lack of a better term. They're actually a plastic insert. And then working on getting a lot of the wiring and the lights out. So those are the signal lights, as well as a lot of the wires and the wire clips for it. This is the air intake. And then we'll start working on the headlights here. The headlights are kind of held in with a spring, which was kind of surprising. But nonetheless, getting those out of there, getting the housing out of there, and then, yeah, trying to get that electrical cabling out. It was just everywhere. The back of this thing was disgusting, so I'm hitting it with a really aggressive 80 grit here again. Even the front was bad because, again, it takes a lot of rocks and bugs and stuff like that. So I hit it pretty hard too. As you can tell right off the bat, it's really getting wore down. And then I took it to the same 220, 320 wet that I did with all the rest. These are those surrounds again that I was talking about. So they're just simple little pieces. So now I got the window back. I got the glass removed for like $25 at a local shop, Budget Glass in Calgary. So tell them I sent you. And I'm using my wire wheel here to get all the glue out from around the window. And now sanding. This would be the inside of the window. So on a Jurassic Jeep, the inside and outside are actually two different colors. Just a small technical detail if you didn't know that. And of course with the wet sand, and then cleaning it up as well. So Jurassic Jack back again, playing with the sander. It's getting away from him a little bit, but he's doing some good work. So these are just little inserts that cover up the door latches for the full doors. So it's something that he could just put a little bit of work into. And he actually did a really good job. But you only get his attention for a few minutes at a time before he starts squealing and running around. But, you know, he'll look back on this years later and enjoy it. So my buddy Corey comes over, and so I could show you my video on how I got this up here. But basically, I used to use the winch from the Jeep, and without the winch, I had to basically be the winch myself, and then Corey could let it down. And we're doing the test fit here because I have to mark out where the stripes are supposed to go, and the stripes technically don't go on to the hardtop because there were no hardtops in the Jurassic movies. So I'm kind of just speculating where they would go if they continued to run up and over. And that's what we're doing right here. And so since this is the proper red, and this is about the only place on the Jeep I'm reusing the original red from my Jeep, I decided I'm just going to mask it off and leave it. We put a decal on the top here for JP, Jurassic Park 73. So the first decal install, that's pretty cool. It's actually a template, not a decal. And deciding where I'm going to cut that off and where the red's going to end and the sand beige is going to begin. So again, there's a little bit of creative control here because this wasn't part of the movie, and I can kind of do it the way that I think it'll look cool. And so that's what I'm doing. And masking off all the stripes so this thing will be ready to paint. So this is one of the pieces that needed the least work, at least on the outside. The inside, well, that's another matter. Because right here, there was a broken clip. So the fiberglass actually fractured here. And so what I'm doing is I'm clamping it down, cleaning it up, and I'm going to use some fiberglass resin here just to basically clamp it and glue it back down. So fiberglass resin is a little different than the Bondo because it's more like a honey. It's very thin, and so it'll flow. And again, it turns rock hard. So now I'm sanding the inside. Again, it's mostly just dirty. There's nothing really wrong with it. And here, so now I've got my resin that has dried. I'm sanding it again, as you can see. So basically the repair has partially been done on the inside. And now I'm adding fiberglass mat. So you take the resin and mix it with the mat and then apply it. I'm going to put 2 sheets on to make sure it's extra strong. And once it's dried, I'm going to sand it down. So this stuff is hard, like 80 grit. It really has a hard time even taking a bite out of this stuff. But that's what you're going to need. You need this hardness in order to keep that thing attached. And the mat is what adds the strength. And once that's in place, putting on the Bondo again to clean it up, make it look like something. I got the stupid wire in the way, which I can't remember if that activates the sprayer or if it activates the heated window or something, but that's what that wire is for. Sanding it down again, getting it all cleaned up, and I'm going to end up putting on a little bit more here, try and spread it out, just like doing drywall compound. You know, you want to feather it out as far as you can, and giving it a sand again, and bringing the grit of the sandpaper up at the same time. So there, that fix is done, and it's actually looking too bad. Next, I'm going to have to re-drill the holes for actually attaching, because there is some threaded steel inside. I have to align them so you can kind of see through, and then I used the template from the actual bracket and drilled them in. I used a brad tip point bit. So this is a bit of a side project to something I wanted to do. This is a rail that I'm going to weld up underneath the flange for the hardtop so that the hardtop can actually be bolted down without needing to use nuts and washers and things. So I want it to be permanently installed in the Jeep so I could just have, you know, a wrench and do the whole thing. I don't need to actually have a nut on the bottom side and then the nuts fall and they get trapped under the seats and then they're under the vehicle and then the rabbits got them. And anyway, so that's what I'm doing here. And unfortunately, it's, whatever reason, the content of me installing these got lost. So all that I have here is me just sort of test fitting it. So you get the idea. I run these bolts through and it goes up into place, and then I'm going to spot weld this from the top using my same through hole technique. But that part is what got lost. So you can get an appreciation for what I'm doing. There ends up to be 4 of those on each side. And now we're doing the roof. So again, creative control. I decided I was going to do something a little bit special for the roof here. At 15 times speed, it looks like I really know what I'm doing, but it was going a lot slower before. And with the X-Acto knife, a little bit of zigzags here. And oh my God, there's a raptor clawing my roof. So that's what this is meant to look like. I don't know if it's going to work. I sure hope this turns out because I thought it was a pretty cool idea. Again, not a whole lot of creative flexibility on a Jurassic Park Jeep, so you got to take what you can get. Now I'm getting into sanding, and I'm just hand sanding this. So this is about, I think it's a 220 that I'm starting with. And it'll probably be enough on its own. You just need to rough it up so that the paint will adhere to the old paint. Working around the decals here. So when I peel those off, I'll have some nice red behind it. And the rest of this is going to be the sand beige color. So even the color of the roof is up to interpretation. I decided to stick with the sand beige because I think it looks the nicest from the pictures that I've seen of guys who've done it. And a little bit of wash down there as well. It's actually looking pretty good. And then before I'm done, touch up the inside, clean it up, wash it down, and mask the windows. I only ended up masking the one window because I'm going to replace the other one because the previous owner sandblasted it and it looks like crap. So one of them is just going to get painted right in there. So that is that. Well, that was a long one. A whole lot of sanding, Autobody work, stuff I've actually never really done before. So it was the first time in that. You can't tell, but this place smells like fiberglass resin and welding fumes. There's a fine pink dust on everything from all the sanding of the red Jeep. So as you can tell, I'm pretty exhausted, but it was a long go. This was about 4 months of work to do all the Autobody stuff. But I wanted to get all of it done, like every little bit of sanding, every little bit of repair before I went on to painting, because I'm going to have to build a big paint bay over here behind me, and I can't be creating dust when I have that in here. So instead, I created all the dust in advance. So I was kind of take a look around. So I've got the roof. That was actually a pretty easy job. The one that was more challenging, of course, was the tub behind me. It was a big job, but it was probably the most rewarding of all of them. But most of it was just like all the little stuff, you know, like I have bins full of pieces here, and I'll just show you the spreadsheet I had here. I think it ended up being around 32 different parts that needed to be identified, cleaned, sanded, potentially repaired, either with welding work, steel work, or sometimes fiberglass work, or just with Bondo. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, but now I'm kind of ready to do the next part, and I'm really looking forward to it. I've never painted a vehicle before, so I'm going to do a separate video on how to build the paint bay, and then the next video in this series will be actually using the paint bay. So that'll be exciting. Thanks for staying with me through these times. It's 2nd of January 2021, so Happy New Year, and I hope you stick with me through to the end of the project. Thanks a lot.